someone. Alrighty, for those of you who are here, you can come on up to the front and turn in your exam if you have it. So how'd the first exam go? Okay? Anything horribly unexpected? You can always like talk to me individually too, if you're like, this didn't make any sense. Because I'm always trying to make the exams as fair as possible, but also a nice indication of where you're at. Come with me after class. Okay. Alrighty, so yeah, if you have your exams, you can bring them on up to the front. I'm just checking folks in as they walk in. Okay. So I wanted to just orient us now that we've done our first exam. I had to wait for Blackboard to let me to sign in. Just gonna pop onto the syllabus here. Alrighty. So sort of do a you are here on a map. Alrighty, so we just finished our first chunk of the semester. So next we're gonna start talking about gender, sex, and sexuality. This lecture will be more like mixed, interactive, different activities. Then we'll talk about personality. After that, we have fall break, not too far. And then we'll talk about social psych, and then you'll have another exam. So each exam in this class is about 3 chapters, basically. It's a lot of material, as y'all are discovering. So I don't want to overwhelm anybody. Also, just be making sure that you are keeping up to date on your Connect assignments, and then the explain it to the media quizzes, which are also on Connect, or on Blackboard rather, right here. And they're all here for the whole semester if anyone felt like working ahead. Alrighty. The next big thing that you should be thinking about coming up is a week from Friday. Your topic or your myth for your infographic is due. This is simply creating some sort of Word doc, putting in there, I want to do this myth and this is why. There's a place to upload it on Blackboard. And this is to get you thinking about that project before anything else. So, oh, and this should be 10. Yeah, no, that's right. Okay. So you just upload it here. And then I can give you guidance on any feedback I have about that. So folks who are just coming in, definitely feel free to turn in your exams. And then we will go ahead and dive into our next topic. So unfortunately, because I think this is such a fun topic to talk about, I also teach gender, women, and sexuality studies. So this is a topic that's like near and dear to my heart. But unfortunately, this is a topic that has been politicized. And so I want to fully acknowledge that before we dive in, that this is something that is now controversial. This is something that people are trying to make laws telling people what they should do about like basically their most personal of personal lives, right? And it's a little absurd in my opinion. And so this is a topic that people might have strong feelings about, and I want you to be welcome to explore those feelings, but also to be open to the science that's behind this. All right, so some basic definitions is what we're going to start with. And we're going to start with defining sex. And I'm going to start by saying all of these things. Whoa, what just happened? That is bizarre. Okay, I didn't know y'all couldn't see what I was showing. Jesus. Okay, hang on just a sec. I know how to fix this. There we go. Okay. Alrighty. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. What I'm gonna start by prefacing this with is that everybody seems to think that this is very simple, when in fact it honestly is not. And that's nothing to do with me trying to be like a woke professor. It's everything to do with me just accurately representing the science. So these are just the biological things that are associated with determining someone's sex. And one thing I'll do real quick before we dive into anything else, got some talk out, is talk about the difference between sex and gender. These two terms get mixed up quite a bit in our society. Sex is the biological things, what your chromosomes are, what parts you have, right? What was determined by your genes. Gender is socially constructed. Gender is all of the things our culture says happen because you're male or female. So culture is what says it's okay for me to wear this lovely maxi dress, but it's like shunned for anyone who's male identified to wear that, right? It's getting a little better with people like Harry Styles, right? But there's nothing biological that says that, right? But there is actual pressure, sometimes explicit rules in society that says when you are this biological sex, you should act in this way, and that's gender. Again, people in our society get this really mixed up. One of the best examples of this, I think, is gender reveals, right? Which are becoming more and more dangerous, strangely, like starting forest fires. Like, don't start forest fires to reveal what the like anatomy your child has, right? You can cut into a cake, that's fine. And so people tend to use gender to mean like which reproductive organs you have, when in fact gender is really all about these socially constructed things that like women tend to be in certain jobs more than men, or that men are better at sports than women, right? Those are all socially constructed, and a lot of times have been sort of dictated throughout the years. Also, the idea that this is somehow, making sure everybody's checked in, is that this is somehow strictly binary, right? That we only have male and female, is in some way socially constructed. And we'll talk about why as we go through with this slide and other slides. But there are many, many cultures, even if we're just talking from a gender perspective, where there are not just two genders. A lot of indigenous peoples have much more gender expression, and often people who were what we might call now non-binary were given roles as like shamans or priests. And then also just biologically. So we think of, okay, you're either XX and then you're female, or you're XY and then you're male. But in fact, there is a big spectrum of that. There are people who are XXY, two X's and a Y. There are people who are what they call XXO or XO, where they might have a chromosome that's not really X or Y. And so even something as simple as your chromosomes, right? You're either XX or XY. there is a lot of variation in that just naturally occurs. Now, is it a huge chunk of the population? No. But the people who are within that sort of overarching thing, and there are other things we're going to talk about that would put them in this category, are sometimes referred to as intersex. I'll write that on the board as well. So people who are intersex have either both male and female reproductive organs, or it's vague, like you can't really tell. You might be like, Dr. Myers, how could you not tell? Well, is a external reproductive organ that's sort of this big, is that a big clitoris or is that a small penis? Right, and sometimes when the baby is born and it's extra tiny, it sort of becomes unclear, and doctors sometimes just sort of arbitrarily assign a sex. And in the past, in particular, sometimes very invasive surgeries have been done on infants to correct and try to make that infant appear more binary, either male or female. Now, the thing that happens most often is we wait, right? And sort of let that child develop and see sort of what their expression is and what they want to do later. And so what I'm talking about right now are gonads and some of your other reproductive structures. So the ovaries in people who are XX, or just people that have ovaries, and the testes in people that have testes, develop from the same organ. So if you're not familiar with embryonic and fetal development, every single zygote up until sort of the embryonic stage is female, has female reproductive organs. If they are XY, at one point during that embryonic development, there's a like sort of hormone wash. This is very abstract. It's not quite biologically accurate, but essentially there are chemicals within the body that tell that embryo you're going to become male. And so instead of those gonads becoming ovaries, they descend and become testes. So like if you look at anatomical diagrams or something like testes, like there is a line down the middle, and that's because there are technically two that again would develop into ovaries in someone else. There are actually folks who have testes, but then have all other female reproductive organs. And so that might be an XXY, or that might just be sometimes biology doesn't quite get where it needs to, right? Or develops weirdly. And part of that's got to do with your gonadal hormones, estrogens or androgens. So there's a sort of cliche pop psych thing within our culture, right? That it's like, oh, you know, the testosterone, that's male, right? Everybody in this room, everybody on the planet has both estrogens and androgens. Just the balance of them is different depending on a whole bunch of things that go on in your genes. And so sometimes there are people who are XX, but who have abnormally high levels of testosterone, for example. And that might affect their development. One of the examples of this is Caster Semenya. Some of you may be familiar with her. She's a track athlete from sub-Saharan Africa. She did not know until people started saying this person is too good that she had abnormally high levels of testosterone. Like it's not something we just test when you're a kid, right? It's not like they go and check your eyes, check your ears. Oh, do you have too much testosterone, right? And so a lot of folks who are intersex or folks that do have sort of these weird mixes of things don't know until someone sort of calls it into question. And so this can create confusion and lead to things like, again, Caster did not know and has been disqualified from any future track competitions because of this quirk of her biology. One of the things I forgot to say is that, yes, being intersex is not super common, but the percentage of folks who are intersex in the world is about the same percentage of folks who are naturally redheaded. And we would never say, oh, redheads don't exist, right? So just sort of like thinking about that, giving it context. Internal reproductive structures. So there are folks, and again, rare within that sort of, I think it's like 2 to 5% of folks who are intersex who might have a penis and testes, but internally have a uterus, right? And they might not know that, again, because we're not like doing full body CT scans on people, right? They might not know that till something goes wrong in another part of their body and they have to examine it, right? And so folks don't know about this. I've already mentioned the external genitalia, that sometimes it's sort of like, is this the clitoris or is it the penis? Again, same thing as the gonads. These develop from the same organ with that hormone wash or not, right? And so sometimes this is vague, sometimes this is unclear. And then we have, to make things even more complicated, secondary sex characteristics. So this is when puberty hits and you start developing all kinds of fun things, right? Your voice might change, you might get really emotional, nocturnal emissions, developing your menstrual cycle, all the really fun stuff that everyone hates in middle school, right? Or maybe a little before, a little after. These can really vary as well, right? So even just naturally, people that are XX, for example, we tend to think of like the ideal quote unquote woman as someone who has like that hourglass shape, bigger hips, right? Huge boobs. And like people just naturally have different sized chests, right? And same thing for men, the thought of like men being a triangle with big shoulders and like a six-pack. Not everybody can get there even with a ton of exercise, right? Because of genetics. And again, I've now just confused all of like who is masculine, who is feminine, who is male, who is female. And that's just biology, right? This is just things that happen in our genes and our bodies. One thing I should also say is there's also some evidence that things we do to the environment might impact this, might impact our biology. So for example, everyone's been talking about microplastics, right? There's some suggestion that those might mess with our estrogen levels. And so people of all genders, it might mess with how your secondary sex characteristics or other things are displayed, your fertility. There's some evidence that because a lot of people are on birth control, hormonal birth control, not only to avoid getting pregnant, but also because it's the most effective treatment for a lot of disorders like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis. Some of the wastewater that goes into like rivers, it seems to be like those hormone levels seem to be affecting fish who live in those rivers. So all kinds of things, not just what we're born with, can affect this. And again, gender, now that we talked just about bio, we're going to take another step forward and we're going to start talking about gender. And these are those social and psychological aspects of being male and female. And these change as culture changes, right? Give you one of my favorite examples. Okay, I say the color pink. Which gender do you associate that with? Female, right? It's little girls, we dress them in pink and things like that. Barbie's all in pink. Well, until about 100 years ago, pink was actually associated with little boys because it was seen as a softer version of red, which was seen as a very masculine color. So again, something that in our mind just makes sense, right? We just immediately code pink female, was totally different 100 years ago. Again, this will also be different culturally. sort of what are the expectations within different cultures. And then also within like family or social groups, right? So demonstrations of these things might be really different in folks who are more artistic, maybe involved in things like theater or dance, than folks who are maybe more involved in traditional sports like football or soccer. Well, you know, football can be both, right? And so these things, again, we tend to think of as being like, well, yeah, that's just how it is. They can vary quite a bit. And they change over time. So in general, though, we still think of masculinity as instrumentality. What does that mean? We think of masculinity and we think of men as doing, right? If you ask kids to draw a firefighter or an astronaut, they typically draw a man in those roles. Even though we know that women have been in those roles for quite some time, right? In particular, the first female cosmonaut from Russia went up in the 60s to space. And yet we still think of this as like a male coded, because it's something you do, you're using your body to create, to accomplish, right? Whereas femininity, we tend to think more of expressiveness in terms of like emotional expressiveness, artistic expressiveness, and also sometimes objectification, right? That somehow femininity and the female body are to be looked at, right? And this is the idea of a woman is carrying something heavy. Oh, let me get that for you. And sometimes it is too heavy for her, and she'll say thanks, right? But again, favorite example of this, I used to volunteer every Christmas to help the Salvation Army with their Christmas distribution of gifts for families. This is when I was like in high school and college. It was the fittest I've ever been in my life. And everyone else I was volunteering with was 65 or older. And like, they weren't working out. Let's put it that way. I'm not trying to be mean. They're just like normal dudes, right? And they would always be like, let me get that heavy box. And I'd be like, no, please let me get that heavy box so you don't break anything, but like have to find like a really nice way to say it, right? But this idea that like, because I was female, I couldn't lift, even though again, physically, I was in better shape to do that than they were. There's also this idea of androgyny that's a little bit of a dated concept now. But this is the idea of encompassing both masculinity and femininity. Examples of this are like Prince, David Bowie, folks along those lines. And the idea is, you know, kind of straddling this line, maybe dressing in more of a gender neutrally type of way. But now beyond that, we really do more sort of like gender nonconformity, right? Or gender fluidness. When I was having my kiddo, first of all, I did not find out her sex until she was born, because I did not want everything all pink or everything all blue. What was really funny to me, again, to think about stereotypes right at gender, is I had dinosaur sheets on the registry, and people were like, oh, you're having a boy because you have dinosaur sheets, you know, you're just not telling us. I did not know. And I said, any of you that just said that did not know me as a child, because I was dinosaur obsessed, as a lot of children are, right? I had dinosaurs everywhere. So just this idea that like dinosaurs equal male, right? It's like a little absurd, because literally every kid that my child has interacted with, male, female, what have you, is obsessed with dinosaurs, right? And so I thought, I'll try to dress my child in a gender nonconforming way or gender neutral way. What I quickly discovered is in our very like binary coded society, gender neutral means you got to shop in the boys section, right? Because if you want sort of just like blues, greens, reds, those tend to be in the boys section, and everything in the girls section is like pastel pinks and purples. And I was like, well, I don't only want to shop in the boys section. That's not gender neutral. And so what we settled on is a sort of gender fluid, where one day she might wear an Incredible Hulk shirt, right? And then like another day she might wear a dress with a chicken on it. So she wore yesterday because her school has a farm and they went out to take care of the animals. And she was like, I think the chickens will like it. And I was like, I love you, child. You keep me happy. So, you know, again, these can be hard to navigate if you're someone who doesn't fit into a box, right? And again, just a reminder that all this is on top of all the stuff we think is black and white, that we've just talked about how much variation there can be, right? So this is what I was talking about before in terms of embryonic development. So if you have this SRY gene, this gene that says you are going to be male, then you get this wash of hormones, and that is going to create the testes instead of ovaries. Once the testes are developed, they excrete more androgens, more of those testosterones, and that's going to lead more to that male physiology. But as I mentioned, prior to that stage in development, every single embryo, every single zygote is anatomically female, even though they might be genetically male. This is why if you've seen like Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, right? One of the things they talk about is they made all the dinosaurs female so they didn't reproduce. And they're like, wait, how did you do that? And they said, well, there's a step in the process, right, where they would become male and we just denied them that. Right, and like the original Jurassic Park, right? Ian Malcolm, great character, is like, that's not gonna work. He's just like, life finds a way, right? But and it does in that film, and it does in humans as well. But this is sort of the reality of how we develop. That's really interesting to think about in the context of people being like, you can't change your sex. Well, every single male has, right? That's sort of interesting to think about in that context. Now, one of the things that's really interesting, maybe not surprisingly, in a culture so obsessed with gender and sex differences, is that there has been a lot of research that tries to argue that everything that we do that's social, that's gender, not sex, right, that's cultural, is actually biological. There have been a lot of past biologists, psychologists, who have tried to argue this is all happening in the brain. And so they'll say, oh, there's different sizes of parts of the brain, or the brain might have different functioning in different parts in male versus female. And therefore the corresponding cognitive functions differ. And which part of the brain is involved in certain behaviors might differ. Well, one of the problems with this, I'll say before I go to the next slide, is that our brains don't exist in a vacuum, right? Our brains are constantly being influenced by what we learn. So all your brains are like changing, adapting, right? Taking it, but not only what I'm saying, but every class that you're in, every conversation that you have. And you know, again, we don't have everything at birth. And we know we don't have everything at birth. Until fairly recently, not even 30 years ago, the late 90s, they thought that you were born with all the neuronal connections you were ever going to have. You were just born with all your brain circuits in place, and if they got screwed up, you're screwed because they're never going to grow back. And in the late 90s, they discovered what they call brain plasticity. And this means that our brains do develop, change, adapt, create new connections, prune unneeded connections, basically throughout our lives. And this is why if someone gets a brain injury, they can often sort of learn new ways to adapt because they can create new connections. That being said, people really like to look for these, right? And they'll do these in a whole bunch of different ways. So one of the things they'll do is look at biological accounts. How do male and female babies differ right when they're newborns or when they're in infancy? And they argue like, oh, if there's a difference right when they're born, that it's biological. Well, one of the problems with that is that my husband and I were pretty rare in not knowing if our fetus at that point was male or female, right? Most people know. And most people immediately start talking differently to their bellies. And we know that fetuses can like hear some things from the outside world, but people start interacting with the fetus differently if they know it's a boy versus they know it's a girl. Another problem with this research is researcher bias. In order to truly do this well, we need to do like a blind study, right? Because what some studies have shown is, let's say we take a picture of a crying infant and we show it to some very intelligent adults and we say, this is a girl. They'll say, oh, she's so sad. Oh, she needs comforting. We take the exact same picture of the exact same infant and we show it to people and we tell them it's a boy. They'll say, oh, he's so angry. Right? For something as simple as crying, which is the only way babies can communicate. And in fact, it's probably the baby needs a diaper change or is hungry, right? That's the main reason why babies cry very early in their lives. And so we have to be really careful about who is getting the data and how are they interpreting it, right? There's also the idea that like this might be evolutionary, right? This might have happened over human history and things were biologically selected for that were sort of more male or female coded for folks with certain biology. The idea is that, you know, men or males had to compete for mates, and so that created more like need for testosterone and need for strength. And like, yeah, that's a lot of the animal world, right? But like, if you look at lions, for example, if a lioness does not want to mate with a lion, they do not mate. She just shrugs them off, right? One of my favorite like stand-up comedian jokes I've heard, and I wish I had like written down who said this, but was that saying, you know, like gender in humans is so silly how we talk about these differences, right? Because like they're like, oh, the female of the species is so much weaker. Like you would never look at a lioness and be like, oh, it's just a lioness charging me. I don't need to run, right? And in fact, the lionesses do most of the hunting. So if you don't run, you might be dead, right? Other things is preference or choice for equality mate is usually by the female. Sometimes this is said as males tend to mate widely and females tend to mate wisely, trying to get like the best DNA for their selection. There are elements to this, but again, so many different species have so many different things, right? We know there are species where, for example, praying mantises or certain spiders, right? After they mate, the female consumes the male. That doesn't seem like wise selection necessarily, right? And so even within the animal world, some of this doesn't match up. There's also challenges of reproduction, right? Do we want quality and really focus on each individual offspring? Or do we want quantity, right? And within nature, there's a lot of different models for this, right? So a lot of sea life fish, jellies, will have hundreds of babies, even sea turtles, right? If you've ever seen the little videos of like the little sea turtle babies coming out of the sand and trying to get to the sea and they don't all get there, right? The reason there are so many in a nest is that they're hoping like a couple of them will survive to adulthood, right? And same thing for the other sea creatures. If I have, I don't know, 2,000 babies, maybe 100 of them will survive to keep up this species. And a lot of people argued, you know, like in general, quantity is what we should go for, right? But I think if we truly believe that as humans, we would not have such like a knee-jerk reaction to families like the Duggars, right? So if you're not familiar with them, they're the 19 kids and counting people, right? And if we were all like, yeah, let's have as many babies as possible, no one would be like, oh, I don't know why they have 19 kids, right? And so this idea doesn't necessarily always work in a really modern context, right? We also think about social cognitive accounts. So we know that experience in general influences us, right? That's just the whole premise of school, right? We have kids go to school so that they learn. And not only so that they learn knowledge, but they also learn like socialization, right? This is why a lot of people that homeschool now are starting to be part of homeschool co-ops, because they recognize like, my kid also needs to learn socialization and like just how to be a little human, right? And so there's this recognition that, yeah, we need to learn things. And we learn gender. Very early on, we learn like girls do this, boys do that, right? But this is gonna really depend on the context you grew up in. A great little quote. So for a really long time, the 2 US senators from Maine were both women. And one of their daughters, when she was young, was like, Mommy, can men be senators? Because she was only familiar with women being senators, right? So the context in which you are raised is going to really influence these ideas about gender. Also, socialization more directly. Do you get rewarded for acting certain ways, right? If a little girl is in a little tutu and twirling, are people like, oh, you're so cute, right? Or a little boy is wearing a little baseball shirt and they're like, oh, you're gonna grow up to be a little slugger someday, right? The things people say about kids is really weird, man. It's just like things you find out after you have kids, right? But then there can also be punishments. If a little boy wants to put on the Elsa costume at dress-up time, you can either just sort of let it go. Wow, I didn't even do that on purpose. Oh. Let it go. Or you can punish him. Take that off. Little boys don't wear that, right? And how those things are reacted to by the other people in those kids' lives will tell them what's okay and what's not okay. Also modeling. What are the people around them, their friends, but also the adults around them doing? How are they dressing? How are they acting? What is considered socially acceptable for them, right? Do they emphasize sex, right? A lot of elementary school teachers, okay, line up in 2 lines, girls and boys, right? Imagine if we did that, line up in 2 lines, white kids and colored kids, right? I don't even like the word colored, right? But it's weird to think about like we still are socially acceptable to just divide people by something that's sort of arbitrary, right? It's sort of the luck of which sperm ends up fertilizing the egg, right? Because all eggs have an X. Some sperm have an X, some sperm have a Y, right? Also, quick side note, fun fact, for a long time we thought that the reproductive process, the egg was very passive. It just sat there and waited for the sperm to come and inseminate it. And in fact, what we've discovered as we study it more is the egg is very active. It reaches out to like the healthiest sperm and tries to draw them in. Really kind of cool. So it's a mutual process. We also think about gender schemas, which are mental frameworks. And these are like, this is sort of what you're supposed to do if you're this gender or that gender, right? Little girls do this, little boys do this. Sometimes these are like scripts, right? When little girls enter the room, they're very polite and they sit with their legs crossed, right? Things along those lines. So we know that we are learning things throughout our lives. There's also social role theory. That there might be this division of labor that might have been a natural difference, but then that just became what was valued and what was expected and what was acceptable, right? And again, the way we look back on history and anthropology, we tend to think, oh, these things have always been this way, right? But more and more as we find more graves, it's sort of interesting to just think about it in context now, right? That like, are archaeologists just grave robbers, right? Like it's weird to think about outside of a scientific context that we're like disturbing people's bones, right? But that's how we learn about folks. That as they discover more and more graves, they're discovering oftentimes in a lot of cultures, female identified bones are associated with hunting tools or tools of war, right? And so it hasn't always been this way. One of my favorite examples to think about is when we were like prehistoric folks. We're living in groups, we're trying to take down a mammoth, right? Well, you can't do that with just one person, right? Mammoths were massive, like think of an elephant and much bigger. So like your whole group, tribe, clan, whatever you called it, would go out and the women would help hunt, right? And everyone would work together to prepare the meat, prepare the skin so that you had the tools you needed to survive the winter. Save the meats, right? Cure it with salt or some other way, smoke it, and then maybe the skin, prep it so we can make blankets and clothes and things and get us through the winter. So it becomes a question of, is this a gender role that's established, or is it just a stereotype, right? That's existed and has these biases, and people say, oh, you can't do this, right? Another thing that gets confused in all of this is sexual orientation, right? Or sexuality, you'll hear it called. So a lot of people will mix this up with gender. And sexual orientation is the direction of your erotic and honestly also romantic interests. So it's essentially who you're attracted to. It's more than just sexual behavior. It's also who do you want to date, right? Who are you interested in perhaps starting a family with? And this is an old list of orientations. I'm realizing I should have updated this. So we do see that a lot of the population is heterosexual, although this percentage is changing, particularly with folks your generation. A little bit my generation, I'm an elder millennial. We also have people who are homosexual or gay, right? These are folks who are attracted to someone who, at least outwardly, has the same biological sex as them, right? And you have folks who are bisexual who might be attracted to folks of both genders. But there are also other orientations, right? So one of these is pansexual. And these are folks who are attracted to everybody, regardless of gender expression, regardless of other things. And so these might be people who would very comfortably date trans folks. And some folks argue that people who are bisexual would not. Some people argue that bisexual is a bigger umbrella. It's sort of like an individual definition. You also have folks who are asexual. Sometimes you'll also hear the term aromantic, These are folks who are just not interested in having sex. They might like hanging out with people. They might really value friendship, but like they do not have a drive to have sex. And more we're discovering like that is just a thing. It's not because people used to be like, oh, they must have been traumatized as a child. Like, no, it's just a thing, right? Some people prefer, rather than just homosexual, some people prefer using terms like gay and lesbian. And then some people prefer the overarching term queer. Now, the really interesting thing about the term queer is that in the 60s, 70s, that era, queer was a slur. It was something that you said to like demean someone who might be outside of the normal sexual orientation spectrum. But people who are queer have reclaimed this word, reappropriated it. And it is now something that can be used as sort of an overarching term for the LGBTQ plus community, or some people just prefer to describe their sexuality using queer, that it like doesn't need a specific label, if that makes sense. So sexual orientation is not influenced by being reared by a gay parent. They thought at one point in time, oh, it's just, and you still hear people say this, right? We can't let gay people adopt children because, oh, they'll just raise them to be gay. No more so than heterosexual people can consistently raise their kids to be straight, right? We know, unfortunately, from statistics that there are the vast majority of people who come out as queer are raised in heterosexual households, right? And unfortunately, the leading cause of homelessness among teens are LGBTQ plus youth who have been disowned and kicked out of the house when they either come out or are outed. Like, I can't imagine as a parent, like it's just heartbreaking and despicable to me. So we know it's not parental influence. It's not your parenting style. Some people have tried to argue, oh, it's because they parent in a really gentle way, and that's why. No, that also doesn't seem to be causal in any way, shape, or form. And it's not childhood sexual exploration, and you all might be like, whoa, what's that? It's kids playing doctor, right? It's kids being like, I'll show you mine if you show me yours, right? That doesn't influence it either. What we're finding is that it is influenced by genetics. More and more, there does seem to be some evidence that this is genetically based. We're also starting to find some interesting brain differences. That the corpus callosum, which is what connects the two hemispheres of the brain, might be thicker, and that the hemispheric symmetry, so how symmetrical the two sides of the brain are, might differ. There might be some differences in the prenatal hormones that these fetuses receive. And also just social factors, obviously. Gender nonconforming behavior, acceptance of that or not. I know, for example, there are folks who might come out, it sounds so weird, but might come out as gay. So let's say you're a woman and you're not really sure, sort of other than you don't feel like all the other women. So you might come out as gay because you're like, well, I'm attracted to other women, so I must be a lesbian. But then figure out sort of later in life, no, I'm actually trans, right? And I just didn't have like the terminology for that. So things along those lines. They are very similar, members of the LGBTQ plus community, in terms of attitudes and psychological adjustment. The only reason that we sometimes see higher rates of psychological disorders in these folks is because of the discrimination that they face. And they do tend to have some differences, like hobbies, activities, occupations that are less socially acceptable for people of their gender. Right? And the biggest stressor they experience is coping with discrimination and prejudice, and like that idea of coming out, and how does that work? Alrighty, so our next couple lectures will be much more interactive. This was really like the establishing the definitional stuff. If you have your exam and you haven't turned it in, please bring it on up to the front.